Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from Ancient Greek Mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. All right, well, before we get into it, what do you need to know? Well, it's a beautiful, absolutely gorgeous day here in Bowral. It's the big Tulip Time Festival at the moment, so we've got lots of tourists in town. Impossible to park in town, so I've been riding my bicycle a lot, which is also very joyful. Now, the things you need to know before we get into it are Roger the rooster, who lives 2 doors up, is in full voice today. He's just being a cockadoodle doing to his heart's content, so he may interrupt us a few times. We'll see how we go. Also, I have a new puppy, and this is going to be the first recording session he sits through. You may not have realised this, but my old dog, Henry, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago, which we're all heartbroken over, but he actually sat through pretty much every single record of the podcast, but you wouldn't really have known because he was completely silent. He would just sit on the armchair or sit on the bed that's here in my office, and, he never made any noise. It wasn't an issue. But he was an older dog, and the new puppy is a puppy. He's 12 weeks old, so I have no idea how he's going to behave. He was fast asleep by my feet just before I started recording, but then my husband came to check on him, which made him immediately 1,000% awake and run off with my husband. But he may return at any moment and scratch on the door. So these are the issues we're going to be dealing with during the record today. I think that's all you need to know. Yeah, that's all the news. So let's get into it. I've been threatening to get back to the story of Odysseus for several weeks now, and I've actually done it. So we're going to get back on track. If you remember the last story we had about Odysseus following her journey, in my version it's her journey home from the Trojan Wars. We're up to the bit where they'd been on Circe's island, and then Circe had told them they had to go and talk to a prophet who lived in Hades. So they had to sail over and visit Hades, which is a whole big thing. And one of Odysseus's men had fallen off a roof and got there before them because the man, Elpenor, had died. Anyway, so we're going to pick it up from that point when we're coming back to Circe's island. All right, so here we go. The Attack of the Sirens, as told by Nanny Piggins. Nanny Piggins, Boris and the children were riding the bus to school. Nanny Piggins often joined the children on this trip, especially if she wanted to give the headmaster a piece of her mind. But they were only halfway to school when suddenly Nanny Piggins stood up in her seat and yelled, "Stop!" The bus driver hit the brakes hard. He was a kind-hearted soul. Every night he had nightmares about accidentally running over a duck. He could sometimes, and when I say sometimes I mean oftentimes, be quite rude to his human customers, but that was only because he lived in such a constant state of anxiety about running over a feathered pedestrian. The cruel thing is, of course, that ducks can fly. There's absolutely no reason for them to stand about and slowly walk across roads, and yet they do. This caused a perpetual state of fear for the bus driver, whose route ran alongside the creek, the preferred habitat of the common brown wood duck. "I didn't hit one, did I?" cried the bus driver. He was visibly shaking. Adrenaline had kicked in, and he was already terrified he would lose his job. Adrenaline prevents people from thinking rationally. Otherwise, he would have had the good sense to realise that the duck community has no say in the hiring and firing of bus staff. "Hit what?" asked Nanny Piggins. "A duck," said the bus driver. "I don't think so," said Nanny Piggins. All the children, for there were another 30 passengers on the school bus, pressed their noses to the windows as they peered out at the road. "No sign of feathers," said Samantha. "Oh, thank goodness," said the bus driver. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "That's all right," said Nanny Piggins. "I know CPR. I would have been happy to pound on your chest until the ambulance arrived." "You do realise there's more to cardiopulmonary resuscitation than pounding on someone's chest," said Derek. "That's not what it looks like in movies," said Nanny Piggins. "Normally you get in a lot of trouble if you shove someone hard in the chest, even if you've got good reason, perhaps because they've pushed in line in front of you at the concession stand at the movies when you were avidly waiting to purchase a choc top." Nanny Piggins had been banned from their local cinema for taking just such an action. Luckily, she'd only been banned for a week because the manager at the cinema secretly wished she could shove some of the patrons too. "Why did you yell stop then?" cried the bus driver. "It's dangerous to suddenly yell at someone when they're driving." "I yelled stop because I needed you to stop," said Nanny Piggins. "Duh. Isn't that the reason all people yell stop?" "But this isn't a bus stop," said the bus driver. They were in the middle of a 4-lane road. "No, but it should be," said Nanny Piggins, "because this is the point on the bus route that you travel closest, to Hans' Bakery." "Oh," said the green children in unison. They suddenly realised what was going on. "So?" asked the bus driver. He wasn't as experienced with Nanny Piggins' ways. "So I heard the cupcakes siren song," said Nanny Piggins. "Huh?" said the bus driver. "Hans' cupcakes. They're calling to me," said Nanny Piggins. "Cupcakes don't talk," said the bus driver. "True," said Nanny Piggins. "It's more of a song. They lure unsuspecting travellers to them with their beautiful music." "Cupcakes don't sing either," said the bus driver. "Now I can smell them," said Nanny Piggins as she sniffed the air. "The cake shop's 2 blocks away," said the bus driver. "Now the cherry danishes have joined in perfect harmony," continued Nanny Piggins, sniffing some more. "And the mud cake, and the vanilla slice, and the custard tarts. I can smell them all. Quick, children, exit the bus, and not in an orderly manner. There's no time for that. Get out now. We must get to that cake shop." Derek, Samantha and Michael hurried down the bus steps. "And the rest of you," said Nanny Piggins, looking down the aisle at the other 30 children on the bus. "You can't take the rest of the children too," said the bus driver. "They're not yours." "Of course I can," said Nanny Piggins. "I have a higher authority. I have the authority of really good cake. It would be wrong to let these children pass by such fine artworks unappreciated, and the only way to appreciate a cake is by shoving it in your mouth." "I'm going to dob you into the headmaster," said the bus driver. "Fine," said Nanny Piggins. But before the bus driver could stop her, she reached over and snatched the keys out of the ignition. "But you're coming with me first. You clearly have a sugar deficiency in your diet that's causing you to be unnecessarily miserable." The bus driver was partial to a custard tart, and if a deranged pig was going to hijack his bus and kidnap all the children, he reasoned he should go along with all her demands. That is what his union would expect of him. And that is how Nanny Piggins, Boris, the green children, and an assortment of 30 children of various ages, plus a grumpy 42-year-old bus driver, came to be sitting in Hans' Bakery, enjoying a selection of his finest cakes. "We're going to be late for school," Derek warned. "Oh dear," said Nanny Piggins. "Oh well, if we're going to be late, we may as well be very late. You won't get in any more trouble. Hans, another round of cake for all my friends." "And how are you paying for this, Nanny Piggins?" asked Hans wisely. He knew Nanny Piggins only earned 10 cents an hour. "A rich relative left me an inheritance yesterday." "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," said Hans. "Oh, don't be," said Nanny Piggins. "She was 123, which is a very good age for a pig. She left me $100, but there were conditions attached. I had to spend it as quickly as possible on cake." "Such a wise woman," said Boris appreciatively, as he shoved another honey snap in his mouth. "Nanny Piggins," said Michael, "when we were on the bus, you said that the cupcakes were singing to you a siren song. What did you mean by that? Did you mean they were singing like a police siren or an ambulance siren?" "Oh, no," said Nanny Piggins. "Cupcakes have a much nicer singing voice than a police siren." Derek held a cupcake to his ear. "I can't hear them at all." "No, that's because you're human," said Nanny Piggins. "But don't worry, you can't help it, and all the animals with better senses don't hold it against you. Animals are very understanding about humans with disabilities." "But what's a siren song?" asked Michael. "Well, the Sirens were a group of women from the Ancient Greek Mythology days," said Nanny Piggins. Were they cupcakes? Asked Samantha. She was getting very confused. No, I just said they were women, said Nanny Piggins. So naturally, they were pigs. Pigs? Asked Derek. In fact, they were distant relatives of mine, said Nanny Piggins. What a surprise, said Derek. Well, what was so special about their song? Asked Michael. Well, they used to use their song to kill people, including, on one occasion, that great hero of the Trojan War, my dear cousin, Odysseus, said Nanny Piggins. But if the Sirens were your relatives, and Odysseus was your relative, why did they try and kill her? Asked Samantha. Oh, you know what my relatives are like, said Nanny Piggins. Impossibly beautiful, said Michael. And glamorous, said Derek. And wicked, said Samantha. Exactly, said Nanny Piggins. You'd better tell us the whole story, said Derek. Well, then we'd better have a third round of cake. Nanny Piggins took off a shoe and took out the $100 bill she'd hidden under the insole. Hans, will that be enough for everyone to have a third cake? No, he said. But I want to hear the story too, so the third round is on the house. What a wonderful man you are, said Nanny Piggins gratefully. So Hans brought out cupcakes for everyone, and Nanny Piggins began her tale. Our story begins with Odysseus returning to Circe's island so she could bury the nincompoop Elpenor, gather up a ship full of cake, and begin her return journey home to Ithaca. Of course, the first thing Circe did was try and persuade Odysseus to stay so they could be besties. But Odysseus was strong and insisted she must return to her kingdom. So Circe relented and told Odysseus what she must do. You will shortly confront terrible enemies, warned Circe. Ugh, not again, moaned Odysseus. Why can't we ever confront really nice people who just want to know what the time is, or who want to know directions to the nearest restaurant? Because you've angered the great god Poseidon and half the other gods, and now you must put up with their mischief, said Circe unsympathetically. To survive, first you must get past the Sirens. They sing songs so beautiful and alluring, they lure all sailors who pass by onto the rocks of their island. Then they eat them and leave their skin and bones to bleach in the hot sun. Oh, well, that's not terribly nice, said Odysseus. But you can outwit them with my aid, continued Circe. I shall give you wax from my beehives. You must use this wax to plug your men's ears. If they can't hear the siren's song, they will be able to sail by. Okay, said Odysseus. You don't believe me, do you? Said Circe. Well, I'm sure you're not lying, said Odysseus. But how good can singing be? I've heard some pretty songs before, but it's never tempted me to steer my ship onto rocks so all my men die. Fine, said Circe. If you want to hear the siren song, you can, but you must do exactly as I say. Plug your men's ears with the wax, and then have them tie you to the mast of your ship, giving them strict instructions that whatever you say or do, they must not release you. Odysseus thought this was a little over the top, but Circe had been right about everything else she suggested, so he decided to go along with it. So Odysseus and her men boarded their ship and they set sail for home. They sailed for a full day and night when, on the horizon, they saw the island of the Sirens. Now, men, said Odysseus, each of you take some wax that I shall cut off this big block with my sharp sword. Warm the wax in your hands to soften it, then use it to plug your ears. The men did as they were told. Now, men, I need you to tie me to the mast with strong ropes. The men did nothing because they had wax in their ears. Odysseus rolled her eyes. She pulled the wax out of Polites' ears and got him to tie it to the mast. All right, said Odysseus. Now you must row as hard and fast as you can past the island of the Sirens. But no matter how I beg or plead, you must not release me. If anything, just take more ropes and bind me tighter. And so they set forth. The men rowed hard, partly because they wanted to get past the Sirens, but mainly because it was embarrassing to have their general tied to the mast, and they wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. So their ship soon drew close to the island of the Sirens, and Odysseus began to hear the melodic noise of voices singing. It was a beautiful sound. There were dozens of women singing in complicated harmonies. Odysseus leaned towards them, desperately wanting to hear it better. As the ship drew closer, she could make out the words of what the Sirens were singing. Oh, Odysseus, brave and true, how we really do love you. We'll bake you a cake, delicious and brown, that you will hungrily gobble down. We're not trying to kill you with our silly rocks. We wouldn't want blood stain on our pretty frocks. We just want to bake you a chocolate cake. To sail straight by would be a mistake. We're mixing the batter as we sing and adding choc chips to everything. "Oh my!" exclaimed Odysseus. "That is the most beautiful song I have ever heard. I must go to those wonderful women. Men, release me!" But the men's ears were blocked, and they were too busy rowing hard, their eyes trained on the floor in front of them as they concentrated hard, desperately trying not to glance at the Sirens. Odysseus twisted round to see the beautiful songstresses, and they were as beautiful to see as they were to hear. Because they were wearing pretty dresses, asked Samantha. No, because they were each mixing a beautiful bowl of chocolate cake batter. Odysseus desperately struggled to free herself from the ropes. "Men, release me! I order you as your general, as the great hero of the Trojan wars, as the genius who thought of hiding in a wooden horse. I command you to release me so I can go to these marvellous women." Polites and the other men did leap up, but only to grab another, even stronger rope and tie Odysseus down even more firmly. Then they resumed their seats and kept rowing, trying not to look at the Sirens. Odysseus despaired. She desperately wanted to get free so she could leap overboard and swim to the Sirens and try their cakes, perhaps even lick their wooden spoon. "Oh, Odysseus, don't leave us now. If you eat our cakes, you will say wow." Their beautiful, alluring voices eventually faded behind them as the ship moved further away, until Odysseus could hear nothing but the crash of waves against the bow of the ship. She slumped with exhaustion and bitter disappointment. The men got up and untied her, then took the wax from their ears. "Oh, men," said Odysseus, "how could you do that? How could you sail past such a glorious sight? So many women baking so many beautiful cakes." "Odysseus," said Polites, "you were bewitched by their voices. That was not what we saw. We saw horrible, monstrous, lizard-like creatures screeching into the wind like vultures as the skin and bones of their victims, the thousands of men they'd lured to their doom, lay bleached in the sun on the rocks around them." "Oh," said Odysseus, "really? That's what you all saw?" All the men nodded. "There were also smashed up wood and oars and sails from the shipwrecks they'd caused," added Eurylochus. "Oh dear," said Odysseus, "and I was pleading with you to sail over there? I must have looked very silly." The men nodded again. "Never mind," said Polites. "Sometimes your silly ideas do work, like that time you made us all hide inside a wooden horse. That was a good one, wasn't it, fellas?" The men nodded kindly. "I just can't believe how close we sailed to certain death," said Odysseus. "We're certainly glad Circe warned you and gave us all that beeswax," said Polites. "And now the worst of it's behind us," said Eurylochus. "Now we can safely sail home." Said Odysseus, "Circe did mention a couple of other things to look out for." "She did?" asked Polites. "Like what?" said Eurylochus. "Oh, just some clashing rocks, a giant whirlpool, and a monstrous cliff-dwelling six-headed beast," said Odysseus evasively. Just then, up ahead, they began to hear a rumbling sound. Everyone on the ship turned to see what it was. It was hard to tell. There were some enormous rocks that appeared to be clashing, and a huge cloud of spray, but it was hard to see if it came from the clashing rocks or the enormous whirlpool next to it. "Did Circe give you any beeswax that could help us with that?" asked Eurylochus. "I'm afraid not," said Odysseus. "What are we going to do?" asked Polites. "Row really quickly," suggested Odysseus. "And we'll stop the story there," said Nanny Piggins. "But that's not the end of the story, that's the beginning of the next," said Michael. "I know," said Nanny Piggins, "but we've run out of cake, and the next bit is such a crackingly good story. We couldn't endure the excitement of hearing it without a cupcake in each hand and a third in our mouths. And we've already eaten all Han's cupcakes, so we'll have to save it for another day. Besides, if I don't get you to school at some stage today, the headmaster will report me to the police sergeant again. And you know how the police sergeant hates arresting me in the morning, because that's when he likes to get his other crime fighting done." So the bus driver drove them all to school, made up an outrageous falsehood about them being delayed by a flat tire caused by a duck attack, and they all got on with their days, which were a lot happier for having had 3 cupcakes and missed the first 20 minutes of their morning maths lesson. The end. Time for bed. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that story. About 3/4 of the way through, my new dog, Bobby, did burst into my office, and he's now sitting on the floor, noisily chomping on a plastic bottle. So we did pretty well, and at least Roger the rooster was quiet. So that's it for this week, and until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.